Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. And I have to say, after watching Carl's talk, which was fascinating, I hate to follow it up with copyright, which is so boring. But I hear that you had someone yesterday, was it yesterday, who talked to you about copyright. So what I thought I'd do before I actually launch is to see if you have any questions. Did the talk you heard yesterday raise questions for you? Anyone? Yes?
I have no question, because it's an issue that yesterday's lawyer didn't have the answer to. So.
Well, and you think I will, okay.
The fifth fact, the four factors for fair use regarding in the law, and the fifth fact, transformative use. He didn't really have a good example, or wasn't able to, and admitted that he didn't really think that that was clear what transformative use was or wasn't, especially in the kinds of identification. So do you have a response to what transformative use is?
I do.
Oh,
In fact, that's a huge part of what I was going to talk about. So at least I know I'm going to do something that's helpful. Any others? Any other questions that were raised yesterday or that you have in general? I mean, yes.
I wasn't there for the whole talk, but he mentioned, he gave the example of Disney, watching Disney movies in a kindergarten. I believe that was a daycare. And so he was saying that since the parents have to pay for the daycare, that this was a violation of copyright. And I was wondering about that because I thought if you use materials, they're not really paying for the Disney movie. I mean, I thought there are a lot of analogous situations here all the time that we're showing a movie. Do we have to pay for the source every time we show it? The students have paid tuition. I was just trying to figure out, okay, I don't work at a daycare, I work at a university. What's this?
Well, I'm not sure actually that the idea of the parents paying tuition is the reason that there's an infringement of copyright. Because really and truly, the thing that seems to point to for me is just that the business of daycare is a profitable business, and that the daycare should have licensed the business should have licensed the film for its audience. But to me, the real issue, the thing that would separate that from what we do here isn't whether people pay to come here or not, because we're a nonprofit and we know that. But it's what do we do with the film? And I would bet you that if we showed a Disney film in a class here, it wouldn't be for entertainment.
Okay.
But what is it in the kindergarten or the preschool? How about it's to keep them busy while we do something else? It's not about something, and this gets to your transformative, which I will go into in more detail, but we would watch Disney in order to take apart some aspect of how we use cartoons to get across.
Cultural stereotypes.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Thank you. And that use is not what Disney had in mind when he or it made the film. What about this idea? You have a series of old commercials from the 50s. How many of you were around in the 50s? They look real different from the commercials you see today. And if you put together 3 or 4 of them and looked at them in a class today, you wouldn't be doing it in order to sell a product. What would you be doing it for? Give me some ideas why you might use commercials from the 50s in your teaching. Compare what?
With modern commercial.
Right, to see what?
The difference, to see the social norms.
Social norms, right. What else? Go ahead.
I mean, to see the historical, what was the environment at the time, commercially, what products were popular?
What products? What did people do in commercials in the 50s? Do they do that now? No, that's a social norm. That's changed dramatically. So that's where we get our idea of transformation from in fair use. when you take a work that was originally designed with a particular purpose in mind for a certain audience, and you show that work for a different purpose to a different audience, that's what the law considers transformative. And again, I'll talk about that in more detail, but that is such a critical point that I'm so glad you brought it up right away. Are there any other things that sort of piqued your curiosity or made you question that you, yes?
One of the things that he brought up, Marley brought up yesterday, was that, people were kind of shocked and speechless, I guess. If you have an article or some, piece of writing or something like that, or, and he said that if you're teaching a class, you can make one copy, paper copy per student, and pass it out. That's okay. You're not selling it. You're not mass producing it to sell to make money. But that you couldn't post it, like say you had an online repository of the information that you want to use in your class. For example, when I taught a class, I was thinking I was being very forward-looking and saving paper. Instead of copying stuff on paper, I had a SharePoint site set up, and the students got a log on. So it wasn't open to general public. But, I did reproduce copies of articles and references I wanted them to read, and then I uploaded that to the SharePoint, and then each of the students, just the students in that class got a log on. They could go read it there instead of having paper. I thought it would save thousands of sheets of copying. But
Right.
I'm wondering if that was legal based on his definition.
Well, and again, that distinction between paper and electronic, about 10 or 15 years ago, maybe, well, even 20 years ago, that gave people a lot of pause. They were concerned that, what we did with paper wasn't okay with what we do electronic. But very recently, in fact, well, over the course of those 20 years, people's opinions about that changed as they began to realize that we could do things that could make a digital copy less likely to escape into the world, like the firewall you talked about. But also, we now have a case directly on point that says it's fair use. So I really think that distinction has collapsed.
I think that's a big thing for our language teachers because they're posting a lot of materials, from news and
Absolutely.
sources digitally to use in their classes in various
Right.
ways. And were sort of gasping when they thought maybe they would be breaking the law if they did that. So you're
Well,
saying actually that might be okay.
it might be a fair use, but again, I'm going to talk about fair use, and as you'll see, it's not a blanket thing. Oh, anything we do as educators is fair use. It doesn't work quite that well. But it's very generous with us, and I think especially when we are transforming, when we're repurposing works for a new audience, we are in the best position ever. So are there any other things that people wondered about? Okay, well then I'm going to go through this presentation, and yay, it's working. I love it when it works. So there are 4 ways. This is going to be very practical, folks. 4 ways for you to keep the materials that you want to create and present for your students, to keep them legal. You can make them yourselves. Just make them up from scratch yourself. It's easy if you have a lot of resources. You can license things if you've got money and time and perseverance. You can get permission to use things from individual people. You can rely on fair use, and that will be a big part of what I'll focus on. And you can rely on resources that have been created for you in mind, with you in mind, that allow you to do pretty much what any educator would want to do with them. These are Creative Commons licensed materials. They're one example of a whole genre of things where the owner has made explicit for everyone who finds materials online exactly what you can do with them. Are y'all familiar with Creative Commons?
Yes.
Anyone not? Good. Well, I won't spend as much time on that.
I've been talking about Creative Commons.
Good.
Open.
I am a huge fan, but I won't spend a lot of time on it if you already know. Fair use is where I'll really spend most of my time. So, making it, as I alluded to, you have to have certain resources to do that. You need time, you need some money, and you need good, talented people. This seems to me, though, based on what Dr. Sagatov told me you do with your mandate to use authentic materials, this seems to sort of run against that, the idea that you would just make all your stuff up. So I'm not thinking that you probably have that much interest in making your own materials. But if you do, just be aware that it isn't free, because there are these requirements for time, money, and talent. Also, you will need to be sure that who creates the work is the person that you want to own it. If you work for the government and you create work, who owns it? Do you know? The government, right. There won't be any question about that. But if you work for someplace like the University of Texas and you create a work, ownership isn't that clear. It might be you who owns it. It might be the university owns it. And those kinds of things all have to be clarified if you're going to make your materials from scratch. But again, since that's not likely to be where you're going, I won't spend much time on that. Licensing is your next option, and this is the kind of, what I'm talking about here is the kind of thing where you see something you want to use, someone else owns it, you've got to get in touch with them and get permission to use it. This isn't a real good option for us as educators because of what? Money, right? We don't generally have a lot of it, and people who license materials tend to think that the people who want to buy the rights are going to make some money off of what they do, so they can absorb that cost. But can we do that? Do we make money off of what we do? No. So we're stuck with those costs. They're sunk. But nonetheless, sometimes this is an option. It's especially an attractive option if the price is zero. This gets us into the idea of the explicit license that gives you permission without charging you, which is what we'll talk about with Creative Commons. Also, there are implied licenses to use things. How many of you have ever heard someone talk about that? Implied licenses. This is really pretty cool. The way it works is, if I put something online, I, as a reasonable person, need to have a set of expectations about what people will do with it, or else I'm sort of like not very realistic. If I put something online, I should expect that people are going to read it, right? And probably maybe download a copy, print it off. They might use it to make a point. They might point to it and say, look, to corroborate. Or they might want to even use it to make a point that's critical. All of those things are part of what we call the implied license. If you put things online, the law will deem you to imply certain things about people's rights. You can infer that I was a reasonable person, and you can do those things. A lot of nonprofit educational uses are probably going to fit within that implied license. But that's the trouble with it. You're never quite sure where those edges are. What's in it, what's outside of it. In fact, though, you can probably guess to some extent. Like if a nonprofit educational institution like the University of Texas puts something online, it's probably pretty reasonable to infer that we expect people to use those to educate. But if a commercial site has something online, let's say Disney, it may not be as reasonable to make that inference. So you have to use some judgment, but these are real. These implied licenses, at least from the point of view of the law, they are very real, and therefore we can count on them. Dr. Sagatov, sorry, I knew I would do that. Bogdan, shared with me a really fabulous group of resources that I have appended to the end of this talk, and this talk is available on the Learn website, so you can get to these and click on them and go right to these resources. They are resources that either have an explicit license where there's a statement that says you can do what you want with these, or they're implied licenses where it's pretty obvious that this is what was intended, or they're in the public domain. And those such as the Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia. These include lots of wonderful materials that are available for your use that you don't have to worry about asking for permission to use. Just use them. You've already got it. So now that brings us to fair use. Now this will save you a lot of time and money, but just as those implied licenses do, fair use has a fuzzy boundary. So there's some risk in using it because you're never, well, not never, but you're often not quite sure whether you're inside of it or outside of it. It is defined in Section 107 according to those 4 factors that you've already heard about. However, and this is just my opinion. No, actually, I'm not the only person who holds this opinion, but it is an opinion. The 4 factors aren't really that useful, not really that helpful. It turns out that a lot of courts feel the same way I do. Over the years, they've changed their ideas. There's been sort of a morphing of how they work with those 4 factors. But in the last 15 years, courts have tended to collapse the 4 into 2. And you might have heard these. I wouldn't have described it as the 4 factors plus a 5th. The way I describe it is that the 4 factors have just been collapsed into 2. And the first one is, what do you think?
Money.
No. This is good. Is the use transformative? Is the use transformative? Question 1. Second, if it is the amount that you've used appropriate for the work, appropriate to achieve your transformative purpose? That's how courts are looking at it. Now, does that sound like a good thing if you're taking materials that were created for some other purpose besides the one that you want to use them for, a different audience than your audience, and you want to use them today? Does that sound good for you? It is excellent for you. In fact, I think what you do is almost a paradigmatic example of a transformative use. So not only do you need to understand transformative use, you need to really recognize how good this way of looking at the law is. Now, will it always be this way?
Yesterday, about the amount, the lawyer mentioned that 10%. What is the amount for you to give us?
What does that say? What does that mean? It doesn't mean 10%, because is 10% always the appropriate amount to achieve your purpose? No. Now, I'm not going to do it. Not going to do it. All right. Be reasonable. That's my best advice. Use the amount you need. Don't use more. Use what you need. Okay? Now, there is some risk. There is. But there are strategies to reduce it. The first one is make a transformative use. If you're making transformative use, you've reduced your risk better than any other thing you could do. But let's just say that there were some materials that were created for an educational audience in the language you want to teach. And you want to use them with an educational audience. Is that going to be transformative? No. Does that mean they're off the table? No. There are some other strategies you can do to reduce your risk even when your use is not transformative. The first one is to use small amounts. This is where 10% comes in handy. 10% isn't ridiculous. It's just not the only answer. When you need to use materials and either you're not sure it's transformative or you know it's not, keep your amounts really small. The second strategy for reducing risk is look at whether the materials you want to use are available for a reasonable price on the market. This could be a reasonable price for permission, or it could be a reasonable price for the materials themselves. If you can license something really easily, your confidence about using fair use ought to be sort of sinking, going down. If you can't find who owns it, if you can't find or locate, or even if you can't figure out, or they don't respond, then fair use has a better footing for you. And you might still want to keep your use small, but you can actually rely on fair use a little more confidently there. Yes?
What is appropriate permission? I had a colleague who worked for DLI, and he emailed, he found some contact information for several news channels over in the Middle East. He emailed that contact, and they emailed him back, and with permission, saying, yeah, you can go ahead and use it for educational purposes. Is that adequate?
What do y'all think? Absolutely, yeah. It makes sense. I mean, today we do a lot of business in email. You know, what permission, what you're looking for is evidence. Evidence that I did it. And that's pretty good. You know what? Oral evidence is evidence too. It's just that you can fight about it a lot more, right? So these strategies that I just described for you, what they reflect is community standards and common sense. They reflect community standards, which are becoming, right now, a really important force for defining the scope of fair use. The Center for Social Media, have you heard of that? Some of you have. The Center for Social Media has been working for years now to create a set of best practices, guides for fair use that help the people in the various communities that they work with to be more confident about relying on fair use. This group has done more in the last 8 or 9 years to promote fair use than anyone else I know. This is the example of the one for OpenCourseWare, and I know you mentioned it, Carl. They have this guide that helps them know, even in an atmosphere where they're putting things out online for public use, how much they can use. Fair use does not disappear when you don't have a firewall. It's still there. It's just probably a little smaller amounts. This one is one that I rely on. This is a code of best practices for libraries, and it helps us understand how to exercise fair use for the service scenarios that we typically encounter. So all of these Center for Social Media best practices guides, and there are, they're probably getting up towards a dozen by now, all of them indicate that those two common questions are the basis for making fair use determinations. Is the use transformative, number one, and is the amount that you've used appropriate to achieve your transformative purpose? So now do you know, could you tell me what a transformative use is? What is it?
Purpose of the use has changed.
Yes, but give me some things that, if I said, what is a transformative purpose? What is that? What would you say? It's a purpose that, anyone? Yes.
Well, it's a purpose that was not intended by the original creator of the intellectual property.
Right.
Something that was created for entertainment.
Right. It's not intended. It's not the purpose that the original author intended. It's a different one. And different audience. Yes.
So yesterday I asked our guru, I teach language, I use authentic text materials to teach language. What I'm using are newspaper articles that are about the news. First of all, by the time I use it, it's no longer news, it's history. There's transformation just there. But also, especially if I archive it and I use an article that I think is really good about something like an airline crash, or airplane crash, or something like that, or fire, whatever, and it's got great vocabulary and all this stuff, and I use it, it can be used for a number of years. So now it's really history. So the authors, but I'm using it to teach language. I'm not using it to make money as a newspaper person or journalist,
Or to spread that news.
Or to spread that news. Is that transformation in your book? Because it wasn't in Bob's.
Well, you know, of course, Bob and I, if he were both standing here, and this is true of any pair of lawyers, will have different points of view about things. But it reflects two things. One is our exposure to the practice. This is where I live in fair use. And I don't know if Bob's practice is that specific on this topic. But the second thing it reflects is where we start. I start from the point of view of users. I am pro-user. I am pro-fair use. I'm pro-educators. Half the bar is on the other side. The bar is not the bar like you go to drink, but that's what they call a collection of lawyers, a bar. So, you know, we just have different points of view. What you have to decide is you have to make a decision, and I can't actually, you know, give you legal advice about what you should do. But I will tell you this, I have a good basis for my opinions. I don't just pull them out of, you know, a hat. So I feel confident in saying this to you. Yes?
My comment is, before I leave. As a government worker, I think rather than just using, common sense, that doesn't apply to the government. We need specific numbers and regulations. Do this, don't do this, kind. So I think that makes more sense to us, because if we use it in our common sense, it applies to different individuals in different ways, and we are losing our guidelines. So that's what I'm expecting, to learn about copyright issues and that.
So you like numbers like 10%?
Whatever it is, we just want to play safely.
Well, then you can invent those numbers for yourself, as long as they're within the realm of what is the appropriate amount. So you take the appropriate amount, which is fuzzy, and you just narrow it right down. But a lot of other people, I suspect, like flexibility. And so you can really do both. You can have a number, but if you don't want a number, you don't have to have one. Yes?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the difference between your information and what our discussion was with our own agency's lawyers yesterday. And that is, you are looking at it from the standpoint of the educators.
Yes.
He is looking at it from the standpoint of the agency that he is trying to protect from lawsuits, and not from the standpoint of only the educators. That's us. So he's looking at those copyright issues from the whole agency's risk, and not just from the educators' risk.
Okay, well, let me speak to that. I represent an agency too, a state agency, and I'm giving different advice. I'm not worried about my agency getting sued for what educators do. So there's a difference here. He is and I'm not. We have different levels of risk tolerance. His level of risk tolerance is, I don't want any chance of lawsuit, so I'm going to give you a very, very, very conservative, very safe view of what you can do. He believes there's a chance of lawsuits, and he wants to avoid it. I have two differences. I don't believe there's much of a chance, if any, of lawsuits, so I'm not worried about avoiding them. Do you see how that works? Risk tolerance is a personal thing, but we have to be realistic too. I honestly don't believe that we're very likely to get sued for keeping within what other courts have said is transformative use in an appropriate amount. I could give you a bunch of examples of where whole works were used and courts said it was fair use because it was transformative, to give you reasons for my confidence, but I don't have a lot of time. Yes?
Question, I want to go back to the transformative part here. Granted, we talked about it's not the original, intent out of the audience and all
Right.
that. But we also look at teachers from a perspective where they're preparing a lesson plan that they're going to use, let's say, a text for that class session. But what if we move into the realm where the teacher may want to create a curriculum based on authentic text where the material will be used over and over? Can that still be considered in the transformative realm?
In fact, the recent court decision that we had that said that even non-transformative uses could be fair use repeatedly, semester after semester, makes me very confident that transformative uses can be repeated. So again, I don't think the idea that you use something more than once is a problem anymore. Okay?
Actually, I asked Mr. Morel about this issue of attribute selection. He told me that at 10% was safe. That's the number he gave me because I'm working for the curriculum division in PLI and working with the ODA project, and we have a lot of materials online that could be used in the future repeated by students. So that's why I asked him this question. So he said 10%.
Well, again, that is an extremely conservative point of view. If you understand that it's conservative, I mean, well, actually, there's one other factor that enters into this decision making. Here at the University of Texas, as a lawyer, I would never be in the position to tell people what they could do because I don't make business decisions for the institution. I tell the institution about its risk, but then the people who make decisions are the people who understand the whole picture, not just legal risk. In other words, when an administrator makes a decision about what to do, they're taking into consideration maybe 10, 15, 20 different things, not just legal risk. And I can't possibly know all that other stuff. So I don't consider the role of attorney to be one of dictating what you can and can't do as a teacher. Now that may be different when you work for the federal government. And I'm sorry if that's the case, but I would certainly think that understanding the risk, understanding the cases would give you more confidence, would give you the confidence to go beyond 10%. But if it's set down as a line in the sand that you can't cross, you don't have the choice. Yes?
Well, I just wanted to comment that I see, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, and then I'll come to you.
If we're in the court of law, then he will be more on the prosecutor's side and you'll be more on the defender's side.
Yes.
Bingo. Yes. But again, I don't think there's going to be a court of law, see, and someone else may. Yes?
I think one of the things that I can think of that comes up, and this is not authentic material, but it does deal with grammar instruction. And Lord knows there are online resources for the more commonly taught languages for grammar instruction. And we can pretty well assume that the person who created that word created it to instruct grammar. And that's exactly what I'm going to use it for in my class to do. So I may be, and this is often what we do, I might be better advised to refer students to that resource.
Very good idea.
Instead of copying and plugging it into my own material, and we've run into that.
No, that's an excellent point. But again, what kind of use was she making? Transformative or not? Not transformative. So what are the guidelines there? Very small amounts, look to the market. Those two things, small amounts and look to the market. If this is readily available on the market, you ought to be either licensing it or pointing to it. Pointing to it we hadn't even talked about. There's no infringement whatsoever with pointing to stuff. Of course, there's a possibility it won't be there at some point. But, that's not the end of the world, is it? Is that? No. No, it's not. It's not the end of the world. Things that are fabulous have disappeared. Okay, well, yeah, I wish it was still there, but it's not the end of the world. I'll find something else. Maybe even something better. Okay, any more questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, there were certain materials that were produced by the Foreign Service Institute a long time ago in the 60s, 70s. And according to what I understand from what everything that is produced within the government, it cannot be for profit because it is based on taxpayers' money. Now, as institution, the Foreign Service Institute can decide sell its own books and CDs or everything has been produced by us.
You're asking me if you can sell stuff?
Yes, online.
As an agency?
Public, yes.
Well, I mean, I don't know if there's any reason why you couldn't, but from just the totally normal point of view, anybody can sell anything. I mean, this is America.
But it is
That's what we do.
Taxpayers' money.
No. That doesn't mean it can't be sold by the agency. In other words, if an agency, well, you know, it's great if they give it away. But if they want to sell it, I don't see why they wouldn't or couldn't. Now, again, there might be some reason why they can't, but I don't know what it is.
One concrete question. If you buy a textbook, physical books, everyone has a copy of it. But if you wanted to digitize it and using the smart board or something like that in the classroom, does that contradictory to copyright too?
Well, if you wanted to digitize the textbook, now I'm going to take that literally. That's the whole textbook. What do you think fair use would say about that? Why not? Is it transformative? No. So when it's not transformative, we have some questions to ask ourselves. The first one is, can we use a tiny amount? Can we get permission? Yeah, we could get permission. So we're not looking real good for digitizing a textbook. But now let's change it up just a little bit. It's a book, not a textbook, but a book that's out of print. I can't get it easily. Now what? Can I digitize some of it at least? Well, I certainly can be very conservative and stick with 10%. But what if I need a little bit more? Is that going to be okay? It's out of print.
If authors are it's printed before 1949 or whatever year, then it's not copyrighted.
That's true. I didn't even talk about the public domain. And you know, I'm going to have to wrap up. Let me just look through my stuff and make sure there's not something else I really need to say. I think you guys have really, your questions have raised everything I was going to talk about, except for Creative Commons, which thankfully you already know about.
They don't know a whole lot.
We don't know. We're not literate. A little bit.
Not literate. Okay, well, I don't want to waste your time by saying something you've already, I'll just tell you, from my point of view, Creative Commons, the most important thing to understand about it is you can search for it. You can do a search for, the guiding principles of nuclear physics, and come up with stuff that people have already decided you can use. You can search for it. What you need to learn are good search strategies. Because if you decide that there's nothing out there that's Creative Commons licensed that meets your needs, you'll want to know you're right. That you haven't missed stuff because you didn't do a good search. So there's video, there's audio, there are images, and there's text. There are books. There are open educational resources. There are lots of things. The CC licenses are ported to 55 countries, 14 in the works right now, and another 14 being considered and 7 that are in the works. So even for languages that are not the common, triumvirate or of the Roman Romance languages, the likelihood that you can find things is increasing daily. So learn to do Creative Commons searches so that you can find things where people have said explicitly, you're free to use this. The other thing is, if you make things yourself and put them online, how about putting your own CC license on your works so that you turn around and provide for the community of other educators the same generous offering that they've provided for you? We should all be putting CC licenses on anything we put online. Any questions about CC licenses? Yes.
There are different types of licenses.
There are.
And that's where I think it's kind of murky.
I think there's 5. There's Attribution Only, which is the one I like. It just says, I don't care what you do with this, just give me some credit. The second kind is attribution and don't use it for commercial purposes. The third kind is attribution and you can use it for only non-commercial, and I don't want you to make any changes to it whatsoever. No derivatives. Don't mess with it. And the fourth one is, I'm okay with derivatives, but if you make one, you need to give people the right to do what you did with mine. So if you want to mess with my stuff, you better be giving everybody the right to mess with your stuff too. Does that make sense? Okay. And you can combine them, yes.
I was going to say, and Creative Commons, I was talking about the other day, they put it in that language just like, so there's legalese, but then they also have human readable. And
They
it's just
do.
like that.
They do.
So I can mess with your stuff and you can mess with my stuff.
I know, I didn't actually get that from the site. That's just me talking. But I'm glad to know that rang a bell. So when you're doing your searches, this is another good point. When I do searches, I go directly to the attribution. I want to find stuff that has no strings attached whatsoever, except attribution, which I think is really important. So, but if I couldn't find it, I wouldn't stop there. I'd then look at the non-commercial as well. It's not hard to learn these searches. I don't have time to teach it here, but I'm just telling you, learn to do it because there's a wealth of stuff out there. No problem with using it. No questions about fair use, no questions about transformation, no questions about 10%, none of that. It's gone. Okay, any others? Any other questions? Yes?
You mentioned on a previous talk that I've heard, if you wanted to use something, say, on YouTube, if you linked to YouTube rather than embedding that video in your own work, that makes it okay somehow.
Right, linking is not a problem. Period. Just like Creative Commons erases all the problems, so does linking. The problem, of course, that's left is that it might disappear. But again, like I said, is that the end of the world? Learn to think that way. It's not the end of the world. And then you'll be a lot more comfortable with linking.
So linking to a news article?
Not a problem. Not a problem. Not a problem. Not a problem.
It might go away, but in the meantime, you're totally comfortable.
Yeah, and things do change. I mean, I've had this happen, where people have called me up and said a link was, broken, but it's, anything else? One more maybe?
Would it be an equivalent out-of-print book to
Out of print. That's a good point. If something has disappeared, then you can't get permission for it anymore. That increases your fair use case. So yeah,
You've made a copy in case
you might, yes, keep yourself a backup. That's a very good point, yes. But I also, when I have a broken link, I always do a search on a piece of the text to find it under a new link before I assume that it's really gone. I think I'm really out of time, and I do appreciate so much how useful you've been. Thank you.